There can be no society without a shared memory of its history, where it has been, what are its core values and aspirations, who have been its architects. The Eminent Caribbean Jurist Awards was conceptualized in 2019 to recognize and celebrate those outstanding jurists who, by dint of their brilliance, hard work, and determination, have made a consequential contribution to Caribbean society. The 2021 installation of these awards pays homage to pioneering Caribbean women jurists who have built and are building the Caribbean society through their contributions to legal activism, adjudication, corporate governance, education, politics, and public service. These are women who have shattered glass ceilings and who have blazed an inspirational trail for the younger generation and indeed for all of us to follow.
In the category of high national office, we recognize women who, through political and executive power, have made an outstanding contribution to the development of our society.
Sharlene Cartwright-Robinson holds herself to be a trendsetter, daring always to tread unknown paths, leaving a trail for others to follow. Called to the bar in 1998, she was the sixth female to join the legal profession in the Turks and Caicos Islands. By 1999, she was appointed member to the Legislative Council of Parliament and thereafter served on the most influential national consultative groups. Later, as Premier, there can be no doubt that her brand of leadership changed the landscape of governance in the TCI.
I see it as the best of both worlds. We are in the Caribbean. We're an associated member of CARICOM, and I'm a Caribbean girl. So we had the benefit of the relationship of our brothers and sisters in the region and the relationship with the UK. So we had a wide variety of resources that we could draw from and relationships that proved to be extremely fruitful for the Turks and Caicos. So I see it as the best of both worlds. You know, something major like that happens, the election had happened, the results had come out, and even being at the swearing in, I'm still not with it. You know, I mean, it was just so surreal, honestly. And I was sitting in my office like weeks later, and I called my deputy premier and go like, "You realize we're premier and deputy premier?" So I think it really didn't sink in until you really delved into the work, because it is really something that's an accomplishment. You know, you never see yourself there. You work as the leader of the opposition and as the party leader, and that is the end goal. But when it actually happened, it was so surreal. So it was a moment where, you know, I was a bit out of it and not so much in touch with reality, because it was just such an awesome accomplishment. Well, we didn't have much of a choice in choosing which goes first, which goes second. We actually had to multitask. So while we had hurricanes for a bit at the very outset, we had the challenges as Minister of Finance, I day-to-day challenge of avoiding being blacklisted and affecting your financial services. You have also the challenge of illegal sloops. You have the challenge later on in my term of the pandemic, and crime was just ever present. And so we didn't have an opportunity to say first, second, third, prioritize. Everything was priority. For me, the first thing was prayer. Crime was the lingering most difficult challenge, and illegal sloops more than anything. And God certainly opened the door through my colleague, even in Bermuda. I established a relationship with the police. We're in overseas territory, and internal and external security lies with the governor. And so I would have been the first premier who would have been so involved in national security, being very instrumental in making sure we establish something called, or create something called the National Security Strategy that identified all of the threats. And of course, gun crime, gun violence, which is rampant in the region. Turks and Caicos is not exempt from it. How did I choose to approach it? By taking a cross-government approach. We had an attitude in Turks and Caicos that crime fighting was a police problem, but we began a cross-sector approach in government. Then we invited key stakeholders in the private sector. I led a delegation to Bermuda that saw a serious reduction in gang-related violence over a 10-year period. And we started taking it from the very beginning to schools, putting more guidance counselors in the schools, looking at children that may be at risk and making sure they don't fall through the cracks. So while we were dealing with those who may already have fallen afoul of the law, I looked at rehabilitation, but I took a peer approach, which was very new to Turks and Caicos: prevention, intervention, enforcement, and rehabilitation. So we tried to not allow the system, by not doing its job, to have young people fall through the crack. We tried not to create new criminals while trying to rehabilitate those who wanted to be a part of what I call my baby program, A Chance to Change, that allowed those who would have come out of prison to have a fresh start. So I took a very different approach as well to the illegal sloops. And I can't speak about one without the other, because that's crime as well. And that I formed a stronger relationship with the UK, and looked at how we can create a border protection agency, because we had several agencies that were outside on the waters, patrolling the borders, and not really working together. And so that work is ongoing. And then also we strengthened our relationship with the US Coast Guard and entered for the first time a bilateral with the Bahamas, who is really, really close to us. So that is certainly going to be game changers for the future. And whilst I'm not in office any longer, I am confident that Turks and Caicos will benefit from those arrangements. Well, we had an old set of laws in many ways. So very much a part of the achievements that I have is an update and quite a bit of legislation, and wanting to bring social legislation. I think, that's something people would have expected, especially from a female, bring that more to the front. So definitely the legal background assisted me in legislation getting to the House, the Assembly, and even in my relationship regionally, internationally, and other positions that I would have held. While I was premier, I was chair of the Overseas Countries, Territories, and Association. And at that level, you had to be involved in so many things for all of those territories. So definitely my background in law was an asset. If I had to choose one adjective, it would be engaging, and using modern tools for that engagement. Be it with the civil service, be it with the people of the Turks and Caicos, be it with the regional leaders or international leaders or the United Kingdom, and through its governor here, as well as key players in HMG, Her Majesty's government. I would say transparent and accountable, because at the end of the day, I embraced social media. From I was leader of the opposition, they used to call me Facebook Queen. They thought it was such a dirty thing back then. And in 2021, everybody's on social media. So when I came in as well, I made sure that people knew where I was. I was very visible. I was very vocal. I used press conferences and briefings from I was leader of the opposition. So it was certainly not surprising to the people of the country that as premier, I would come in and use for the first time in government, embrace it at that level, social media. When I speak of transparency and accountability, I believe that my brand of leadership took it to another level, and that we had regular briefings and press conferences, but we also had annual reports from all ministries on the anniversary of our being sworn in. We would give full reports from what we call our promise tracker, which would have been created from our change document. Additionally, in terms of engagement, we would go on the radio and make sure that persons are able to ask us questions. And then in the House of Assembly, we use ministerial statements much more than any other government to update on key changes in policies. And so we kept the people informed, we kept them along. In terms of accountability as the Minister of Finance, I gave frequent updates on the country's finances outside of the budget session and created something called the Citizens Budget that actually took 400 odd page document and reduced into about 10 pages, tell us how we make money, where we're spending it, who got the chunk of the pie, what projects are coming up. So people would have seen a more transparent, accountable, engaging government in the Sharlene Cartwright-Robinson administration. Surreal. Little old me and little old Turks and Caicos. I give you a joke though, I'm a Caribbean girl. My mom is the typical Caribbean woman. She has not told me as yet that I'm a woman. It is really exciting to be recognized by my region. I am through and through a Caribbean girl, did all my studies here. I'm a UE girl, and so to be recognized by a region that has so much talent and so many women that have contributed in so many ways, it is indeed an honor. And then to have had such a tumultuous term, and God saying through the people, it's time to move on, which I fully grasp and totally at peace with. It was such a perfect icing on the cake for this to have happened for me, and I'm indeed grateful for the CCJ's recognition. And those who would have nominated me from Little Turks and Caicos, and certainly it is a plus for the people that allowed me to serve them as well, from my PDM family to the people that voted for me and the people that continue to support me in whatever endeavor. But I'm going to continue to give back to my region, and I thank you so much for the opportunity.
Dame Constance Viola Mitcham, a lawyer in active private practice who currently also serves as an ambassador extraordinary and plenipotentiary of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. Dame Constance Mitcham is also special advisor to the Prime Minister, Dr. the Honourable Timothy Harris. A trailblazer in the field of Caribbean politics, in 1984, Dame Constance attained the singular distinction of becoming the first woman to be elected to the Parliament of St. Kitts and Nevis.
While growing up here in St. Kitts and Nevis, I noted that women were not in the decision-making halls of business or government. In those days, there was a House of Assembly. There were no women. Women could not even judge their peers by becoming members of a jury, because the qualifications at that time was that you must have a house with a certain number of windows. And of course, women were not the landowners or property owners at that time. So that when I came into government in 1984, as the first woman elected to Parliament in St. Kitts and Nevis, I had a job to do. I was asked, of course, to establish a Ministry of Women's Affairs. And that only came about because I said there was no other ministry that I was interested in at the time, even though I was a lawyer. I said my preference would be to see a full Ministry of Women's Affairs established, and I was allowed to do that.
And some of the issues were extremely difficult because you remember you're going into something of a holdover from a colonial experience. One of the issues that perplexed us was that any female unmarried civil servant who became pregnant had to leave the civil service. actually resign. And that was one of the things that we sought to change. So administratively, we were able to change that. And then, of course, there was the question of the status of children, because children were being recorded as without a father, because again, this was the unmarried situation. And so we pioneered the Status of Children Act that was replicated in several other territories in terms of ensuring that in the column for name of father, that there was a name there.
And even before joining in 1984, I made representation in terms of improving the status of women and children in St. Kitts and Nevis. We had situations where even as a young lawyer, I go to court in a paternity matter, and the summons is marked summons in bastardy. Children born out of wedlock were described in the laws as bastards. And of course, these were some of the things that had to be changed as far as I was concerned. We introduced things like 13 weeks maternity leave with pay. Children born out of wedlock could now get their father's name on their birth certificates. And of course, the word bastard was abolished from the paternity affairs. So these things, that social justice, I mean, it didn't just start when I entered the government in 1984. It started way back, looking at what was happening in my country after leaving school and going off to London to study law. These are some of the things that kept nagging in my mind as I went through law school in England and finally returned home, and felt that I had to make a contribution to the improvement of the status of women.
She's got a lot more experience. She's been out at international conferences, still representing the country. She's been used in several difficult diplomatic situations because of her skills. She's extremely persuasive in terms of being able to speak in a very quiet tone, but being able to be quite impactful. So she continues to be a very prominent person in our society and to render service whenever necessary. She has always been very true with her time and her efforts. I don't think there's anything that if you ask her to do for the national interest that she would not do.
Dame Billie Antoinette Miller. Dame Billie Miller stands out as a remarkable individual for her roles in Barbadian and Caribbean politics. Entering politics by winning a by-election in 1976 for the city of Bridgetown, she began her illustrious political career, which saw her taking that seat 7 times during her 32 years in politics. Dame Billie Miller's success in the 1976 elections marked the 3rd time that a woman would serve in the House of Assembly in Barbados. Later, she became the first woman to sit in the cabinet, and during her distinguished political career, held several ministerial portfolios.
I can remember, like when I was 6 years old. I was born in 1944, and there was a big general election in 1951, but there were other elections in between there. That was, I would have been like 6 or at max 7 years old when my parents, my mother always went with my father when he was campaigning. Before you get on to the platform, you know, you do a long campaign, and she would be going in one direction, he would be going in the other. Sometimes I would be with her, sometimes I would be with him. And I got to know all of his chief canvassers. And I began to learn the techniques of canvassing at that age. It was wonderful. I was having a great time, but I was observing a lot of things too. I can remember my father explaining to me all sorts of things, because I tend to ask questions, and I still do. But he would speak to me as an adult, as he would to an adult, because he used to say to me, "You speak in the superlative all of the time." I'm not aware of it, maybe I still do, but he explained a lot of things to me, so that by the time I was like 10 years old, I could campaign too. Then I left Barbados and went up to Durham University. Now, Durham University at that time had a college, King's College, but it was not in Durham itself, but it was a town away. I had written all of the documentation that you had to have done to apply and so on. My mother had died in January of that year, 1961. And so I had to do all of that myself. And of course, you put your name, you put your date of birth. So in September, when I arrive there and I go to get registered, lady looks up at me and she says, "But you can't be registered here. You're only 17. I said, "Well, why not?" She said, we British universities start at 18. I said, "But I'd written my date of birth when I made the application. So I don't know why this confusion has, arrived at." Anyhow, in the end, what had to happen, I told her straight, there's no flying back to Barbados. And what they did then was to have the university council meet, and they gave permission for me to stay. So I was the youngest. I then started to do my law degree there. Sir Grantley Adams, my father had asked Sir Grantley Adams if he would recommend me for, there were 4 Inns of Court. Well, in my time, I suspect they're still there. But my inn was grazing, and so was Sir Grantley's. So he wrote and said, I suppose, nice things about me and so on. And so I had to go down to eat my dinners every term. It was good. There were not many Caribbean people there. Then I had to go down to London now to live there so that I could do my bar finals. When Barbados was proposing to go to the status that we now have and are moving away from, my father came over because at that time he was the only minister who retained his seat when the Barbados Labour Party lost the government in 1961. And so he came with the delegation representing his party. I made it my business to be there at dinner time every evening. And it was very interesting because people like David Simmons and myself were literally there in person while the future of our island was being negotiated. As I returned, I got called to the bar and discovered that I was the only woman practicing law at the bar at that time. There was another woman, but she was a magistrate. When I came to the bar at that time, there was little or no family law. I'm reading here for you now. There was no Family Law Act. There was no Protection of Children Act. There was no Domestic Violence Protection Orders Act, nor Prevention of Cruelty to Children Act. I was appalled. I couldn't believe that there was nothing. And, you know, my attitude was, we've got to do something about this. All of those that I just read out to you were put in place on my watch. And that was the beginning, and then it got better and better and better and more and more. My first portfolio was health and national insurance, which was virtually the same portfolio my father held. In 1961, when the Barbados Labour Party lost the government, he was the only minister who retained his seat. And so he became the leader of the party, and that's how he got to London when they were having the talks for independence. But during those years, it was not easy at the beginning. Health was a dream because I'd seen what my father was doing. I had gone to Cuba on my way to Europe once, and I visited one of their clinics, except they called it a polyclinic. And I liked what I saw there, and I remembered it. So that when I got my health portfolio then, I put quite considerable network of polyclinics around Barbados. And the other portfolio was national insurance. I added a number of things to what was existing at the time when the portfolio came to me. I got into Parliament for the first time in 1976. And it took 18 years until I saw two other women walk up the steps of the House of Assembly of Barbados. I consider to myself even now. Mia Amor-Motley, who is now Prime Minister, Mia Amor-Motley, and Elizabeth Thompson, who is an ambassador. And I had mentored both of them. 18 years, I was the only woman sitting in the cabinet. And there were so many times standing on the floor of the House making an argument for something to do with social life, the things that I thought were wanting, without a woman to come to, add to that. And that has changed a great deal now. It was one of the most gratifying moments of my life. In fact, it was the beginning of a golden 14-year period when in Barbados, women occupied leading positions in government and in the public service. The governor of the central bank was a woman. The cabinet secretary was a woman. The head of the civil service was a woman. The accountant general was a woman. The head of the foreign service was a woman. The deputy prime minister and leader of government business in the House of Assembly was myself. And the head of the revenue authority were all women during those years. Isn't that incredible? I can only say to you that I enjoyed every moment of it. It is not easy, public life at that level. It is not easy. And I don't regret anything in those 32 years.